I'm Karen, 29, and for my entire life, I felt like the family outcast. 3 months ago, at Thanksgiving dinner, my suspicions were confirmed when my parents coldly announced, "You're adopted. You get nothing when we die." The revelation shattered me, but I had no idea an even bigger shock was coming. Days after my grandmother Margaret's funeral, her lawyer called with news that left me speechless: a $2 million inheritance and a sealed letter revealing family secrets my parents had buried for decades. Before I tell you how my grandmother's final gift completely transformed my understanding of my identity, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever discovered a family secret that changed everything. Growing up in Wellesley, an affluent suburb of Boston, I always had the sense something wasn't quite right about my place in our family. Our red brick colonial on Woodland Street projected the perfect image my parents worked so hard to maintain. My father, Roy, built his reputation as one of Boston's most ruthless corporate attorneys, while my mother, Diane, transitioned seamlessly from debutante to charity board fixture, her calendar perpetually filled with fundraising galas and committee meetings. Then there was my younger brother, Wayne, 3 years my junior, and unquestionably the golden child. From his birth, it seemed the family constellation had found its true center, relegating me to some distant orbital position. Where Wayne received lavish praise for minimum effort, my achievements were acknowledged with perfunctory nods. His baseball trophies commanded the central position on the mantel, while my academic awards and art competition certificates were tucked away in drawers or relegated to the back wall of the den. The physical differences between us were impossible to ignore. Wayne inherited our parents' blonde hair, blue eyes, and angular features. I stood out with auburn hair, hazel eyes, and a rounder face with high cheekbones that prompted frequent comments from strangers. "Where did she get that beautiful red hair?" people would ask at church or community events. My mother would tense slightly before offering her practiced response. "My grandmother had the same coloring. Genes can skip generations." Then she'd quickly change the subject, a subtle discomfort I noticed even as a child, but couldn't quite understand. Family photos told their own story. The walls of our home featured countless images of Wayne's milestones, while photos including me were noticeably fewer. In group portraits, I was often positioned slightly apart, as if I'd been added as an afterthought to the family composition. Birthday celebrations further highlighted the disparity. Wayne's parties were elaborate affairs with dozens of guests, professional entertainment, and expensive gifts. Mine were modest gatherings with a few friends, a store-bought cake, and practical presents like clothes or school supplies. "We're just respecting your more serious personality," my mother would explain when I questioned the difference. "Wayne needs more encouragement to feel special." My grandmother Margaret was the glaring exception to this pattern. My father's mother, a widow with an independent streak, treated me with a warmth and interest no one else in the family showed. During her monthly visits from her home in western Massachusetts, she would smuggle art supplies into my room and sit with me for hours teaching me techniques she'd learned in her youth. "You have a gift, Karen," she'd whisper as if sharing a wonderful secret. "Your ability to see and create beauty comes from somewhere special inside you." When I was around 8, I overheard a heated argument between grandmother Margaret and my parents after one of our art sessions. "She deserves to know the truth," Margaret insisted, her voice carrying up the stairwell where I sat listening. "We've made our decision," my father replied coldly. "This arrangement works for everyone. Don't interfere." "It doesn't work for Karen," Margaret countered. "Anyone with eyes can see that." "Mother, please," my mother interjected. "We took her in when no one else would. That should be enough." Took me in. The phrase stuck in my mind, feeding a growing suspicion that I wasn't truly their daughter. Yet whenever I tried to broach the subject of adoption, my parents reacted with unusual intensity. "Where do you get these ridiculous ideas?" my father would demand, face flushing with anger. "Don't repeat such nonsense." The closest I came to confirmation was at 13 when I discovered a partial birth certificate while searching the attic for a school project. The document was missing key pages, but what I could see showed a different hospital than the one where my parents claimed I was born. When I confronted them, my mother snatched the paper from my hands. "That's from a school project Wayne did about adoption procedures," she explained hurriedly. "It's not yours." Though unconvinced, I learned to suppress my questions. The household ran more smoothly when I played my assigned role, the serious, independent daughter who needed minimal attention and made no waves. I focused on academics and art, finding validation outside the family that I couldn't get within it. Still, the question of my true identity lingered, surfacing in quiet moments when I'd study my reflection and wonder whose features I was really seeing. My artistic abilities, my temperament, my very appearance seemed to come from somewhere else, someone else. The mystery of my origins became both a wound and a fascination, something I carried silently as I navigated the carefully maintained facade of our family life. Grandmother Margaret remained my one true ally, our bond strengthening with each passing year. During holiday dinners, I'd catch her watching my parents interact with Wayne and me, her eyes narrowing at the disparity in their treatment. Once, when I was 15, she pulled me aside after a particularly difficult Christmas where my parents had gifted Wayne a car, while I received a practical set of college reference books. "Remember, Karen," she said, holding my hands tightly in hers, "your worth isn't measured by how they see you. Someday you'll understand everything and it will set you free. I promise you that." At the time, I thought she was simply offering comfort. I had no idea she was making a vow that would ultimately change the course of my life. When acceptance letters arrived, my senior year of high school, Northwestern University offered both an excellent design program and something equally valuable, distance from Boston. Despite my parents' pressure to attend a local college where they could maintain their influence, I held firm on my choice. The scholarship that accompanied my acceptance provided the financial independence I needed to make the decision without their approval. "I don't understand why you need to go so far away," my mother complained as I packed. "There are perfectly good schools here." "Maybe she needs the space," Grandmother Margaret interjected during one of her visits, giving me a knowing look. "Some people need to find themselves away from home." My father merely shrugged. "It's her decision. We won't be financing any emergency trips home when she gets homesick." But homesickness never came. Instead, the Chicago campus became the first place I truly felt I belonged. Without the constant comparison to Wayne and my parents' subtle undermining, I found myself thriving both academically and socially. My roommate freshman year, Janice, quickly became the sister I'd never really had with Wayne. Where he had been distant and competitive, Janice was supportive and genuine, celebrating my successes and helping me through difficult moments. "I don't get it," she said one night after I received a particularly cold email from my mother in response to news about my design award. "They act like your accomplishments are an inconvenience." "That's just how they are," I replied, the explanation worn smooth from years of repetition. "They've always been that way." Professor Sylvia Bennett. My graphic design mentor provided another form of validation I'd never experienced. Where my parents dismissed my artistic talents as a hobby, Professor Bennett recognized genuine ability and pushed me to develop it further. "You have a unique perspective, Karen," she told me during office hours. "Your work shows both technical skill and emotional intelligence. That's rare." Under her guidance, I secured internships each summer, avoiding extended returns to Boston. My visits home became limited to major holidays, brief tense affairs where I'd retreat to my room as much as possible and count the days until I could escape again. During these abbreviated visits, Grandmother Margaret made special efforts to see me, often suggesting lunch outings where we could talk privately. During my sophomore year Christmas break, she revealed something that caught me by surprise. "I know how you feel, you know," she said as we sat in a quiet corner of her favorite restaurant, "being the outsider in the Walker family." I looked up from my salad. "What do you mean?" she sighed, twisting her napkin. "Roy's father, your grandfather, never fully accepted me. I came from a more modest background, and he made sure I knew I didn't quite measure up to the Walker standard. Dad never mentioned that. Roy learned family image management from an expert, she said with unusual bitterness. He watched his father treat me as an accessory rather than a partner. I'm afraid he absorbed those lessons too well. During these precious meetings, Margaret would sometimes make cryptic comments that hinted at deeper family secrets. There are truths that need to be told when the time is right, she would say, changing the subject before I could press for details. At the time, I assumed she was referring to general family dynamics, not the bombshell she was ultimately preparing to drop. My junior year, I began dating Frank, an architecture student, who asked the questions about my family that I had learned to avoid. "Why don't you ever talk about them?" he asked one evening after I dodged another inquiry about my childhood. "There's not much to tell," I said automatically. "Everyone has family stories, Karen, good or bad. You talk about your grandmother, but it's like your parents and brother don't exist." His persistence gradually broke through my practiced deflections, and I found myself sharing the persistent feeling of being an outsider in my own family. Frank's reaction was illuminating. "That's not normal, you know," he said gently. "The way they treat you. Have you ever directly asked if you're adopted?" "Many times. They always deny it. But you don't believe them." "I want to," I admitted. "But something doesn't add up." My graduation ceremony crystallized the family dynamic perfectly. My parents and Wayne attended properly dressed and bearing appropriate gifts, performing the role of proud family for anyone watching. Yet when my name was called to receive my degree with honors, their applause seemed mechanical compared to their enthusiastic response to a classmate's family nearby. Later at dinner, they spent more time discussing Wayne's junior year achievements than asking about my plans with the design firm that had offered me a position. Grandmother Margaret, unable to attend due to health issues, sent a heartfelt card with a check far more generous than my parents' gift. "Spread your wings now," she wrote. "Build the life that makes you happy, not the one they expect." I took her advice, accepting the position in Chicago permanently, despite my parents' not-so-subtle hints that I should return to Boston. The distance provided clarity, and as I built my career at the marketing firm, I developed confidence in my professional identity, separate from family expectations. My financial independence grew alongside my career, reducing another tether to my parents' control. The modest apartment I shared with Janice became a true home filled with warmth and genuine connection that my parents' showcase house had never provided. Throughout these years, Grandmother Margaret remained my most consistent family supporter. She visited Chicago twice, delighting in my adult life and exploring the city with genuine interest. Our phone calls became weekly rituals, and her birthday cards always contained generous checks and messages of affirmation. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become," she wrote on my 28th birthday. "Remember that you are stronger than you know. You'll need that strength someday." Again, the cryptic quality of her message struck me as odd, but I attributed it to her advancing age and occasional tendency toward dramatic phrasing. I had no idea she was preparing me in her way for revelations that would soon turn my world upside down. 3 months ago, I returned to Boston for Thanksgiving, a trip I'd been dreading but couldn't reasonably avoid. My promotion to senior designer seemed worth sharing, though I anticipated the news would be overshadowed by whatever was happening in Wayne's life. The house was exactly as I remembered, impeccably decorated, emotionally sterile. My mother greeted me with an air kiss near my cheek, already distracted by dinner preparations. My father offered a perfunctory handshake before returning to the football game. Wayne, now working at father's law firm, despite mediocre grades in law school, arrived last with his new girlfriend Donna, immediately commanding everyone's attention. Dinner proceeded with the familiar dynamic. My mother interrogated Donna about her family connections, while my father and Wayne discussed firm politics. I sat quietly offering appropriate responses when directly addressed, which wasn't often. As pumpkin pie was served, my mother turned to me with practiced interest. "And how is your little design job going, Karen?" "Actually, I was promoted to senior designer last month," I replied. "I'm leading the rebranding for Midwest Health Network now." "Oh, that's nice," she said, already turning back to Donna. "Did you say your father is on the board at Massachusetts General?" Later, as coffee was served in the living room, conversation turned to a topic that would unexpectedly change everything. Wayne mentioned that his colleague's parents had died suddenly in a car accident. "The whole inheritance situation is a mess," he explained. "No will, three siblings fighting over everything." "That reminds me," I said, the question forming spontaneously after hearing about a similar situation with Janice's family. "I've always wondered about your estate planning. Is everything split between Wayne and me?" The room fell silent. My father set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. My mother's smile froze in place. Wayne suddenly became intensely interested in his phone. "Why would you ask that?" My father finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Just curiosity," I replied, sensing the shift in atmosphere but pushing forward. "Janice's parents just updated their will, and it made me wonder." My mother exchanged a look with my father before turning to me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of irritation and something that looked almost like guilt. "You're adopted," she stated flatly. "You get nothing when we die. That's just how it is." The words hit me like a physical blow, confirmation of suspicions I'd carried my entire life, delivered with casual cruelty. "What?" I managed to say, looking from one parent to the other. "We never legally adopted you," my father clarified, his tone clinical. "We took you in as a favor to a family friend. There was never any intention to include you in the inheritance." I turned to Wayne, whose uncomfortable expression confirmed he'd known this supposed truth all along. "You've known this my whole life and never told me." My voice cracked with emotion. "It wasn't our place," he mumbled, still not meeting my eyes. "When were you planning to tell me?" I demanded, turning back to my parents. "We didn't see the need," my mother replied. "You've always been independent. We assumed you'd make your own way." "Who are my real parents then?" I asked, struggling to process this confirmation of my lifelong suspicion. My father sighed, as if my questions were becoming tedious. "Your biological mother was a colleague of mine who died in childbirth. The father was unknown. We agreed to raise you as a favor with certain financial arrangements that benefited the firm." "Financial arrangements," I repeated. "What does that mean?" "Her family was grateful for our willingness to take you in," he explained. "They made a substantial donation to the firm's foundation. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement." So I was a business transaction. The hurt was evolving into anger. "Not a daughter, but a tax write-off." "Don't be dramatic," my mother snapped. "We gave you a good home, excellent education, every advantage. Many would be grateful." "Grateful?" I stood up, no longer able to contain my emotions. "You've treated me like an unwelcome houseguest my entire life. Every achievement ignored, every need minimized. And now you tell me it was all a business arrangement." "Karen, calm down," Wayne interjected. "This is why they never told you. They knew you'd overreact." Overreact. Finding out my entire life has been a lie is overreacting. I grabbed my purse from the side table. "Who else knows about this?" "Does grandmother Margaret know?" "Mother has always had romantic notions about family," my father said dismissively. "She believes you're better off not knowing certain things." "I need to go," I said, moving toward the door. "I can't be here right now." "Running away won't change the facts," my mother called after me. "You're not a walker. You never were." Those words echoed in my mind as I drove through the dark streets of Boston to my hotel, tears blurring my vision. Everything suddenly made sense. The different treatment, the physical dissimilarities, the constant feeling of not belonging. Yet rather than providing relief, the confirmation opened a deeper wound. Not only was I not their biological daughter, but I had been nothing more than a business transaction, a favor with financial benefits. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotional turmoil. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into work while processing my new reality with the help of Dr. Clara, a therapist Janice had recommended. Our sessions became a lifeline as I navigated questions of identity and belonging that had suddenly intensified. "You're experiencing a profound grief," Dr. Clara explained during one session. "Not just for the family connection you never truly had, but for the truth you were denied all these years. I had just begun to establish a fragile equilibrium. When another shock arrived, Grandmother Margaret had died suddenly of a stroke. The news came from Wayne, a terse text message. Grandma died last night. Funeral Thursday, FYI. Despite my recent estrangement from my parents, I knew I had to attend. Margaret had been my only real family connection, the one person who had shown me consistent love and interest. The thought that I would never again receive one of her encouraging cards or hear her gentle voice brought fresh waves of grief. The funeral service was held at the Walker family's longtime church, an imposing stone building in downtown Boston. When I arrived, I was directed to a seat in the back rows, not with the immediate family at the front. My parents acknowledged me with cold nods before turning away. Wayne avoided eye contact entirely. Throughout the service, speakers praised Margaret's kindness, generosity, and independent spirit. I sat silently weeping, mourning not just my grandmother, but the final severing of my connection to the Walker family. As people filed out afterward, an elderly woman I didn't recognize approached me. "You must be Karen," she said, taking my hand in her frail one. "Margaret spoke of you often. She was so proud of you." "Thank you," I managed through tears. "She meant everything to me. She wanted you to know that—" The woman continued, her pale blue eyes intent on mine. "No matter what happens next, remember how much she loved you." Before I could ask what she meant by "what happens next," my father appeared, steering the woman away with practiced charm. I left the reception early, unable to bear the pretense of family unity for one moment longer. 3 days later, the call came that would change everything once again. "Is this Karen Walker?" The male voice on the phone was unfamiliar, but carried the formal tone of someone conducting official business. "Yes, this is Karen." I balanced my phone while sorting through design mock-ups at my desk. "My name is Albert Richardson. I was Margaret Walker's attorney and the executor of her estate. I'm calling regarding her will." I set down my pen. "Her will I don't understand. I'm not expecting any inheritance." There was a slight pause. "Ms. Walker, your grandmother has left you a significant bequest. $2 million to be precise, along with her lakeside cottage property in western Massachusetts." The room seemed to tilt. "There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Albert assured me. "Margaret was very specific about her wishes. However, there are some sensitive matters we should discuss in person. Would you be able to come to Boston this week?" "Sensitive matters. What does that mean?" "I prefer not to discuss details over the phone," he replied carefully. "The bequest includes some personal items and information Margaret wanted delivered directly to you." 2 days later, I was back in Boston, this time staying at a downtown hotel rather than attempting to navigate another toxic family interaction. Albert's office was located in a historic brownstone in Beacon Hill, the kind of old money establishment my father always respected. Albert himself proved to be a gentle-mannered man in his 70s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a courtly demeanor that put me immediately at ease. "I've known your grandmother for over 40 years, he explained as he led me into a wood-paneled conference room. "I was not just her attorney but her friend and confidant. She trusted me with matters she shared with few others." He placed a leather portfolio on the table between us. "Margaret amended her will 6 months ago, creating a separate trust specifically for you. The $2 million is held in this trust, with stipulations that prevent any other family member from accessing these funds under any circumstances." "My parents will contest this," I said automatically. Albert smiled slightly. "Margaret anticipated that reaction. The trust is ironclad, I assure you. She was very thorough in her preparations." He continued explaining the technical details of the inheritance, including the lakeside cottage and its contents, which had been transferred to my name before Margaret's death to avoid inclusion in the general estate. "There's one more item," Albert said, reaching into his desk drawer. He withdrew a sealed envelope, cream-colored and expensive, with my name written in Margaret's distinctive handwriting. "Your grandmother left specific instructions that this letter be delivered to you privately after her passing. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Should I read it now? If you wish, I can give you privacy. He gestured to a smaller adjoining office. Take as much time as you need. Alone in the quiet room, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of handwritten text. My dearest Karen, the letter began. If you're reading this, I've finally been released from a promise that has burdened me for decades. Now I can tell you the truth that should have been yours from the beginning. What followed was an account so shocking I had to read it 3 times before the reality began to sink in. I was not adopted. I was my mother's biological daughter, born of an affair she'd had with my father's colleague, James Sullivan. When my father discovered the pregnancy wasn't his, he had implemented a cruel punishment, forcing my mother to raise her own daughter as if she were an unwanted outsider, a business arrangement rather than family. Roy discovered the affair through a private investigator, Margaret wrote. Rather than divorce Diane, which would have created a public scandal, he devised what he considered a more fitting revenge. You would be raised in the household, but treated as an obligation, not a beloved child. Diane would have to watch her biological daughter grow up without being able to show her true maternal feelings. It was psychological torture for her and unspeakably unfair to you. The letter continued, explaining how Wayne's birth 3 years later was actually the result of another affair, this time a desperate attempt by my mother to save her loveless marriage by providing Roy with his own child. When genetic testing revealed Wayne wasn't his biological child either, Roy had doubled down on the deception, accepting Wayne as his heir, while maintaining the fiction that I was the only adopted child. I fought against this arrangement from the beginning, Margaret continued. But Roy threatened to cut all ties, preventing me from having any relationship with you if I revealed the truth. So I made a different plan. I would be the grandmother you deserved, provide the love they withheld, and ensure that someday you would know the truth and have the financial security to live independently of their manipulation. The final pages contained the results of DNA testing Margaret had secretly commissioned, confirming beyond doubt that Diane was my biological mother. She had also traced my biological father, James Sullivan, learning he had never known about my existence, and had died in an accident 10 years earlier. I couldn't tell you while I lived, the letter concluded. But I couldn't let you continue believing you were unwanted when the truth is you were always meant to be loved. The money and property I've left you represent the inheritance you deserve as my granddaughter by blood, not charity. Use it to build the life you choose, free from the web of lies that has surrounded you. Know that I have always loved you truly, not despite your parentage, but because you are exactly who you were meant to be. I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. Everything I had believed about myself had been a carefully constructed lie. I wasn't an unwanted child taken in as a business arrangement. I was Diane's biological daughter, deliberately estranged from my own mother by my father's vengeful scheme. When I finally emerged from the room, Albert took one look at my face and nodded in understanding. She told you everything I see. Did you know? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Some of it, he admitted. Margaret confided in me when she changed her will. She needed to ensure the legal arrangements would protect you from potential challenges. I need to confront them, I said, suddenly certain. My parents. They need to admit the truth to my face. Albert nodded. I anticipated you might feel that way. I've taken the liberty of arranging a meeting here tomorrow morning if you wish. Neutral ground would be advisable for such a conversation. I agreed, grateful for his foresight. That night in my hotel room, I read and reread Margaret's letter, trying to absorb the seismic shift in my understanding of my life and identity. I wasn't adopted, Karen, from unknown parents. I was biologically a walker with a second heritage from James Sullivan that had been deliberately hidden from me. The auburn hair, the artistic talent, the temperament that never quite matched the Walker family mold, all inherited from a father I would never know. As dawn broke over Boston, I prepared myself for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult confrontation of my life. My parents arrived at Albert's office precisely at 10 o'clock, their faces set in identical expressions of controlled anger. My father, impeccable in a charcoal suit, addressed Albert rather than me. "This alleged inheritance is clearly the result of undue influence," he stated without preamble. "My mother was 82 and not always lucid in her final months." Albert smiled thinly. "Margaret was evaluated by 2 independent physicians before making these changes to her will. Their sworn statements affirming her mental competence are included in the legal documentation. We'll contest it regardless," my father continued. "The family estate should remain within the family." "I am family," I interjected, finding my voice. "More than you've ever admitted." My mother's eyes darted nervously between my father and me. "Karen, surely we can discuss this reasonably. Whatever Margaret told you—" "She didn't tell me anything while she was alive," I interrupted, pulling out the letter. "She wrote it all down instead. Every detail of your affair with James Sullivan. My actual birth. Dad's discovery and his cruel punishment. Even Wayne's true parentage." The color drained from my mother's face. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "Absurd," he declared, but the lack of conviction in his voice was telling. "Margaret included DNA test results." I continued, placing the documents on the table. "Scientific proof that Diane is my biological mother. She also located James Sullivan's family and confirmed his identity as my biological father." "This is preposterous," my father insisted, but my mother had begun to cry, her composure crumbling. "It's true," she whispered. "All of it. I'm so sorry, Karen." "Diane." My father's sharp reprimand came too late. "No more lies, Roy," she said, looking directly at me for perhaps the first time in decades. "She deserves the truth." What followed was a painful excavation of the past. Through tears, my mother described her lonely early marriage to my father, whose workaholic tendencies and emotional coldness had left her isolated. James Sullivan, a new associate at the firm, had shown her kindness and attention that eventually developed into an affair. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I was terrified," she admitted. "Roy had been away on business for months. There was no possibility the child was his." "I had suspected for some time," my father interjected, his voice hard. "The private investigator confirmed everything." "You could have divorced me," my mother said, a statement she had clearly made many times before. "And reward your infidelity with half my assets and a clean break," he countered. "No, you made your choice. You had to live with the consequences." "But she didn't make that choice," I said, anger rising. "I was the one living with the consequences of your revenge plan. My entire childhood was collateral damage in your marital power struggle." "You were provided for," my father insisted. "Many children have far less." "Material provision isn't the same as love," I replied. "You deliberately created an environment where I would always feel like an outsider, where my own mother had to pretend I wasn't her biological child." "It was torture," my mother admitted quietly. "Watching you grow up, seeing James in your features, your talents, your spirit. Having to maintain emotional distance when all I wanted was to embrace you as my daughter." "You could have told me the truth any time," I said, tears threatening again. "You chose your lifestyle over loving your own daughter." "Roy threatened to divorce me if I ever told you," she explained. "I would have lost everything, including any chance to be part of your life at all." "And Wayne?" I asked. "The letter mentioned he isn't Dad's biological child either." Another uncomfortable silence fell over the room. This time it was my father who responded. "After the initial situation with you, Diane and I attempted to rebuild our marriage. It was unsuccessful. She sought comfort elsewhere and became pregnant again. I chose to accept the child as mine for appearance's sake." "So you've been lying to Wayne his entire life, too?" I was aghast at the web of deception my parents had constructed. "Wayne's situation is different," my father said dismissively. "He was raised as my son in every way." "Because you chose that," I pointed out. "You could have made the same choice with me." "The circumstances were different," he insisted. though the justification rang hollow. "Did you ever try to contact James Sullivan?" I asked my mother. "Did he know about me?" She shook her head. "Roy made it a condition of our continuing marriage that I never contact him again. I don't think he ever knew." "He didn't," my father confirmed, a cruel satisfaction evident in his tone. "And it's a moot point now. Sullivan died in a boating accident about 10 years ago." The revelation that my biological father had died without ever knowing of my existence hit me hard. Another connection permanently severed before it could even begin. "Margaret managed to locate some information about him," Albert interjected gently. "Photos, biographical details. She included them with the cottage inheritance." My father scoffed. "Mother always was a sentimentalist. It doesn't change anything legally." "It changes everything for me," I said quietly. "My entire understanding of who I am and where I come from." The meeting continued for another hour, deteriorating into threats from my father about legal challenges and counter-threats from Albert about public exposure if they pursued that route. Throughout, my mother remained largely silent, occasionally making aborted gestures toward me that never quite materialized into actual contact. As they prepared to leave, my father issued a final warning. "If you accept this inheritance and the lies that come with it, you're no longer welcome in our home or family gatherings." "I haven't been truly welcome in 30 years, I replied. "At least now I understand why." After they left, Albert assured me again that the inheritance was legally secure despite my father's threats. "Margaret planned for every contingency. The trusts are structured to withstand any challenge." I thanked him for his support and left in a daze, my mind swimming with revelations that would take months to fully process. I was not who I had thought I was. Yet somehow the truth felt more authentic than the identity I'd carried my whole life. I was Karen Sullivan Walker, daughter of Diane Walker, and James Sullivan, granddaughter of Margaret Walker, heir to both a fortune and a family history far more complex than I had ever imagined. In the weeks following the confrontation, I took a leave of absence from work to process everything that had happened. My boss, Janet, was surprisingly understanding when I explained I'd received an unexpected inheritance that required my attention. "Take the time you need," she said. "The team can cover your projects for a few weeks." I decided to visit the lakeside cottage, the other significant part of my inheritance. Located on a quiet cove of Lake Quinsigamond in western Massachusetts, the modest property had been Margaret's personal retreat for decades. I had visited once as a child, but remembered little beyond the peaceful setting and Margaret's obvious contentment there. Driving up the narrow gravel road, I was struck by the cottage's charm. Weathered cedar shingles, a wide porch overlooking the lake and gardens that, though overgrown from neglect, still showed evidence of careful planning. It wasn't grand like my parents' home, but it radiated authenticity and warmth. Inside the cottage was exactly as Margaret had left it. Books lined the shelves, comfortable furniture invited relaxation, and family photos, including many of me throughout the years, suggested this had been a place where she felt free to express her true feelings. Most striking was the room she had used as an art studio filled with natural light from north-facing windows. Canvases were stacked against the walls, and an easel stood by the window with a half-finished landscape. I moved through the space reverently, recognizing that this room represented Margaret's true passion, one she had largely kept private from the family. As I examined the paintings, I discovered something astonishing. Many of them were of me at various ages from toddlerhood to recent years. Margaret had been documenting my life through her art, creating the visual record my parents' photo albums had denied me. Behind a stack of landscapes, I found a portrait that stopped me in my tracks. A man in his 30s with auburn hair and a thoughtful expression looked out from the canvas. The resemblance to my own features was unmistakable. A note taped to the back confirmed what I already knew: James Sullivan, 1994. Nearby was a wooden box containing letters, newspaper clippings, and photographs related to James. Sifting through them, I learned that Margaret had maintained secret contact with him for years, developing a friendship independent of her son's knowledge. The correspondence revealed James as thoughtful and kind with artistic sensibilities that mirrored my own. In one letter, he mentioned suspicions about having a child he'd never met, though he didn't name names. "There are rumors about a child from my past," he wrote to Margaret. "I've tried to investigate, but the trail always goes cold. If you know anything about this, please tell me. I would never abandon my own child, no matter the circumstances." Margaret's journal entries revealed her terrible dilemma bound by her promise to Roy, yet knowing James deserved to know his daughter. Her eventual compromise had been to nurture my artistic talents, the clearest inheritance from James, while keeping detailed records she intended to share with me when the time was right. I called Janice that evening, overwhelmed by all I had discovered. Without hesitation, she offered to fly out and help me sort through the cottage contents. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," she insisted. "I'll take some personal days and be there tomorrow." With Janice's help, the process of exploring Margaret's preserved memories became less overwhelming. We discovered albums filled with photographs Margaret had collected of events my parents had minimized: dance recitals, art competitions, school achievements. She had created the visual history my parents had denied me, a timeline of a life fully seen and valued. Margaret's journals provided another perspective on my childhood, documenting her observations of the family dynamic and her attempts to intervene on my behalf. Her writing revealed a woman torn between loyalty to her son and deep concern for her granddaughter, ultimately choosing to create a parallel support system since she couldn't change the primary one. "Karen shines despite their neglect," she wrote, when I was 16. "Her resilience amazes me. Someday she will know her true worth comes from within, not from Roy and Diane's approval." After a week at this cottage, I felt drawn to learn more about James Sullivan, the father I would never meet. Internet searches yielded basic information. He had been a well-respected architect, specializing in sustainable design with several notable buildings in Boston. After leaving my father's law firm, he had established his own practice focused on environmental law and architecture. On impulse, I visited one of his buildings, a public library just outside Boston. Standing in the light-filled central atrium, I experienced a strange sense of connection to the man who had designed this space, whose artistic vision and DNA I had inherited without knowing. Through professional directories, I located Louis Grant James's former colleague, who was now semi-retired. When I called explaining who I was, he immediately invited me to meet. "My God, you look just like him," Louis exclaimed when I arrived at his Cambridge office. "The eyes, the way you hold yourself. It's remarkable." Over coffee, Louis shared stories about James that helped fill in the blank space in my history. James had been principled and creative, often at odds with corporate clients who prioritized profit over environmental concerns. His departure from my father's firm had apparently been contentious, though Louis was vague about the details. "James never married," Louis told me. "There were relationships, but he always seemed to be looking for something or someone. Now I wonder if somehow he sensed what he had lost." "Did he ever mention having a child?" I asked. Louis hesitated. "Once, after too many drinks at a holiday party. He mentioned hearing rumors about a possible child from an old relationship. He tried to investigate but hit walls at every turn. I think your father's influence prevented him from learning the truth." The knowledge that James had sought me out, however, indirectly provided a bittersweet comfort. I hadn't been forgotten or abandoned. I had been deliberately kept from him through my father's machinations. Returning to the cottage, I made a decision. Part of my inheritance would establish a scholarship in James Sullivan's name for architecture students, focusing on sustainable design. It felt like the right way to honor the father I never knew and create something positive from the tangled history I'd discovered. As weeks passed, I began dividing my time between Chicago and the cottage, which I was slowly renovating into a space that honored Margaret's memory while reflecting my own aesthetic. The peaceful lakeside setting provided the perfect environment to process my shifting identity and consider my future path. 6 months after Margaret's revelations, I had established a new equilibrium in my life. The inheritance provided financial security I'd never imagined, allowing me to make decisions based on personal fulfillment rather than necessity. After careful consideration, I legally changed my name to Karen Sullivan, honoring my biological father and removing the Walker name that had never truly been mine in spirit. The cottage had been transformed into a comfortable retreat, with Margaret's art studio preserved but updated to accommodate my own design work. I established a remote working arrangement with my Chicago firm, splitting my time between the city and the lake, finding balance between professional engagement and personal sanctuary. My relationship with my parents remained distant and formal, limited to necessary legal communications through Albert. My father maintained his position that I had betrayed the family by accepting Margaret's inheritance and the lies that came with it. My mother had attempted one tentative outreach, a brief letter, expressing remorse for her role in the deception, but years of emotional distance couldn't be bridged by a single apology. The most unexpected development came from Wayne, who emailed requesting a private meeting. Cautiously, I agreed to meet him at a cafe in Boston, neutral territory, for what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. "You look different," he said when he arrived, studying me with new awareness. "Happier." "I am different," I replied. "Knowing the truth changes things." Wayne shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to tell you I didn't know everything. Not until recently. Dad always said you were adopted, but I didn't know you were Mom's biological daughter or about my situation." "When did you find out?" "After the blow-up at Thanksgiving. Dad finally told me everything I think to ensure I'd take their side against you." He looked down at his coffee. "It's been a lot to process." "I know the feeling," I said dryly. "The thing is," Wayne continued hesitantly, "I always sensed something was off in how they treated you. Even as a kid, I noticed the difference. But it was easier to accept the advantages than question them." "You were a child," I acknowledged. "The dynamic was created by them, not you. Still, I could have been a better brother." He met my eyes directly for perhaps the first time. "I'm sorry, Karen." The apology, simple but seemingly sincere, opened a small possibility that had never existed before: a relationship with Wayne based on truth, rather than family fiction. We spoke for nearly 2 hours, comparing our experiences growing up under Roy's demanding expectations and Diane's emotional detachment. "He's always made me feel I have to earn my place," Wayne admitted. "Now I understand why. He's been waiting for me to prove I'm worthy despite not being his biological son." "That's on him, not you," I said, recognizing the parallel to my own journey. We parted with a tentative agreement to meet again, a fragile beginning to what might become a more authentic sibling relationship. I left without expectations, but with a new openness to possibility I hadn't felt before. My healing process continued through regular sessions with Dr. Clara, who helped me integrate my new understanding of my origins into a coherent sense of identity. "You're experiencing what psychologists call post-traumatic growth," she explained. "The trauma of discovering these family secrets has created an opportunity for profound personal development." One unexpected development came from my research into James Sullivan's family. I discovered he had a sister, Wanda, still living in a retirement community in Florida. After several emails and phone calls establishing my identity, I arranged to visit her. Our first meeting was emotionally overwhelming for both of us. Wanda, 82 and frail but sharp-minded, took one look at me and burst into tears. "You have his eyes," she said, holding my hands tightly. "And that same expression when you're thinking. It's like seeing James again." Wanda shared family photo stories and mementos that helped me understand my paternal heritage. The Sullivan family had a long tradition of artistic and architectural talent, explaining my natural abilities that had seemed so out of place among the Walkers. They had also suffered from the same anxiety that had plagued me throughout my life, a genetic predisposition I had previously attributed to the stress of never quite belonging. "James would have loved you so much," Wanda assured me. "He always wanted children. The idea that he had a daughter he never knew about would have broken his heart." "I wish I could have met him," I said, studying a photo of James in his architecture studio. "You can still know him," Wanda insisted. through his buildings, his designs, his letters, and through me for as long as I'm here. Our meeting established another unexpected family connection with Wanda enthusiastically embracing her role as my aunt. We began regular video calls, and I promised to visit again soon, grateful for this branch of my family tree I never knew existed. My professional life underwent a transformation as well. The financial security from Margaret's inheritance allowed me to launch my own design studio focusing on projects that aligned with my values rather than merely paying the bills. My first major client was a nonprofit arts education program, creating branding that helped them secure significant new funding. Among the personal changes, perhaps the most significant, was meeting Victor, the owner of a small gallery, where I had inquired about possibly exhibiting some of Margaret's paintings. Our professional consultation evolved into coffee, then dinner, then a relationship that developed with a natural ease I'd never experienced before. "You're different from when we first met," Victor observed one evening as we sat on the cottage porch watching the sunset. "More comfortable in your own skin." "I'm still figuring out who I am," I admitted. "But for the first time, I'm doing it without trying to fit someone else's expectations." "That's what attracted me to you," he said. "That authenticity. It's rare." As the one-year anniversary of Margaret's passing approached, I organized a small exhibition of her artwork at Victor's gallery, inviting both new friends and old. Wayne attended another small step in our evolving relationship. My parents declined the invitation as expected. Wanda sent flowers, unable to travel due to health issues. Standing in the gallery surrounded by Margaret's paintings, many of which featured me throughout different stages of life, I felt a profound sense of coming full circle. The grandmother who had secretly championed me throughout my life was now publicly acknowledged as the artist and woman she truly was, her legacy preserved not just in her financial bequest, but in her creative work. In my apartment above the gallery, I had created a wall featuring 3 portraits: Margaret's self-portrait, her painting of James, and a new self-portrait I had recently completed. Together they represented my true lineage, the heritage of creativity, resilience, and truth that had finally emerged from decades of deception. The journey from unwanted outsider to self-possessed woman with a clear understanding of her origins had been painful but ultimately liberating. Margaret's final gift hadn't just been financial security, but something far more valuable: the truth that allowed me to finally become fully myself. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed your understanding of who you are? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Do you think I should try to rebuild a relationship with my mother, or is some damage too deep to repair? If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of discovery and healing. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that knowing your truth, however painful, can ultimately set you free. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, family isn't always defined by blood or legal ties, but by who truly sees and values you for exactly who you are.